Welcome back, everybody. You got Will and I-Man here from the Block Runner, MetaZone, Rovi, and MScribe, and today we're going to be talking about why your portfolio is all red.
It's always been all red but
Since January, it's been red, actually.
Yeah, unless you're like a savvy investor and you're diversified, you're not just holding crypto, you've got some equities, maybe you've got some bonds. I think bonds are up, actually. But
Are they really?
I think so. But who the hell owns that? None of us. We're not in the right like demographic of wealth class to be bond holders.
You remember who Brian Johnson is, right?
The vampire?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He released a funny meme yesterday. It was just him with a red light, like, you know, trying to revive, and the red light's coming from his portfolio being all red.
That is pretty good. Not bad. That's a good, like, positive spin. What does red light do to keep you alive?
It keeps your skin healthy. Does
oh my goodness, dude!
Reduces like chances of cancer.
What red light?
Like red light, yeah. It's weird.
Is that like well studied, or that's like Brian Johnson?
No, yeah, it is.
Okay.
There's like red light therapy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
So now everybody's getting healthy skin because of their portfolio.
You're gonna see like these huts spin up all over America now, like red light, red hut. You know, you just go in there and just steam in some red.
You just plug in your portfolios, like yes.
That's right.
All right.
Okay, so why are things red, dude?
Yeah. So they say it's because of tariffs, but others say it's not only because of tariffs.
Yeah, but nonetheless, you know, it's been a while since we've seen this degree of market panic, you know, across the board.
It's been since 2020.
Since COVID. And we were here during the COVID collapse. Yeah. Actually, kind of like before it even, calling like something big is on the horizon.
Yes.
Because that was a lot more obvious to kind of like, you know, visually identify as like a potential black swan event.
I remember it vividly. It was December 2019.
Yeah.
We were looking at tweets in China of people using these flamethrowers in the streets.
Yeah, that was pretty terrifying. And they're literally just piling up bodies and stuff. And we're like, uh-oh, like this is some serious stuff. But nobody was really talking about it.
Correct.
Like, at least here in the West, right? And it's like, and not until this starts occurring in like, you know, other countries. And of course, a couple weeks later, it's like same thing happening in Japan and Korea. It's like, oh shit, dude, it's happening. And then the first cases are reported in the United States.
Yep.
That's when full panic ensues.
And yet we didn't sell a thing.
Yeah, we got wrecked. We got plenty of red light therapy in those days too, right?
We did.
Staring at, you know, doomer charts. Those were rough times, but it was like everybody understood why things were selling off back then, right?
True, yeah.
There was true panic, and it was a very identifiable source, right? This time around, it's not as obvious. It's pretty confusing. There's not as much consensus and understanding, like why. Yeah. Why is what like Trump and his cabinet doing having such a dramatic influence on everybody's financial status? You know?
Yeah. There's definitely a difference in like explanations by many people.
Yeah, I mean, some people interpret this as good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Some people interpret this as like potentially like the worst thing that could have been done.
Yeah, because we have historical references.
Yes.
The exact same thing happening.
Yeah, so part of this, you know, we spent the weekend, you know, doing some investigations. And what I like to do whenever like macro events like this happen, look back in time to see if like it ever happened before. And then what were the
consequences?
You know, how did history unveil moving forward from those events, right?
Yeah, so let's take a look. All right, so what just happened? So this tweet by Kobesai, interesting name.
Kobe, dude.
Kobe?
Kobe's letter.
So this was April 7th. What's today's date? April 7th.
Today is the 7th.
Okay, so
this happened this morning.
So at 10 a.m. this morning Eastern Time, rumors emerged that the White House was considering a 90-day tariff pause. 10:15, CNBC reported that Trump is considering a 90-day pause on tariffs for all countries except for China. 3 minutes later, the S&P 500 had added $3 trillion in market cap from its low. 10:25, reports emerged that the White House was unaware of Trump considering a 90-day pause. 1 minute later, CNBC reports that the 90-day tariff pause headline was incorrect. 10:34, the White House officially called the tariff pause headlines fake news. And then at 10:40, the S&P 500 erased $2.5 trillion in market cap. just from its high in 22 minutes prior.
Yeah,
Never in history have we seen something like this.
yeah. So essentially, like a tweet turned the entire S&P market into a meme coin.
Yeah.
It's like it had the same volatile reactivity to what we see from like a typical Solana meme launch, right? Where it's like, oh shit, it's like this celebrity actually endorsed this contract address. Everybody pump in.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about whenever that happens. Maybe it's like a few $100 million,
Right.
and like market capital, like reacting to those types of events. We're talking trillions, dude.
That's crazy that people move trillions of dollars based off of rumors.
Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, it's amazing that the market can facilitate some of this, like this degree of like a
Degeneracy.
velocity. Yeah, but I guess it makes sense. It's pretty mature, pretty, the rails there, pretty ironclad. But still, it's just, this says something about the current state of the market, right? It's just nobody knows exactly, I think, which angle to take as far as like a bullish or bearish sentiment at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? It's just because it's so up in the air. But I think what this market represents is, we want to see less of what's happening, what's spooking the market.
Yeah,
some sort of like a reversal on like this stance that's coming from Trump and the United States, because that's being interpreted as something bullish. But as soon as the market found out, that's not the case.
Yeah,
Trump is going to remain staunch in his positioning and posturing. Number go down, right?
Yeah. All right, let's continue on here. So Liberation Day, what are tariffs and why do they matter? So if you want to go a little bit deeper as to what tariffs are, why they matter, there's a good article here by The Guardian that goes into detail as to what it is. But tariffs are border taxes charged on the imports of goods from foreign countries. I mean, that's really the large takeaway here.
Yeah.
And so Trump is issuing reciprocal tariffs across all the lands, and other countries are angry.
Yeah, I guess the positioning here, or the narrative here is, the Trump campaign thinks that this country, the United States, has been, I guess, like subject to high tariffs on the way out.
Mm-hmm.
But on the way in, it's like they're not paying, something that matches to that degree, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, now that he's president, he's like, the fuck, mate. It's like, let's try and like balance things out a bit.
Sure.
But that has like really disruptive consequences, right? You have all these global economies that have been like operating under these like environmental conditions for so long. We're talking like decades of like this has been business as usual. And all of a sudden you have like somebody come in and like flipping the switch on everybody. Of course the market's going to react, right?
Yeah, and then on top of that, the way that Trump interprets the decades-long imbalances, there's this trade deficit that he's seeing is in the multiple of trillions of dollars amongst several of the bigger countries.
So this falls in line with like the Doge stuff, right? Where they're trying to identify across the board, like from the U.S. positioning of things, how to improve efficiencies, increase revenue, stuff like that, right? So, yeah, it's at face value, it's like, typically like a news headline you would snooze about, right? Like, you get a fucking tweet about tariffs. It's like, I'm not interested, right? That's been like most of us for our whole lives, right?
Sure, yeah.
Would you agree?
I would agree, yeah.
But it matters in our context now because what? We're highly invested into these markets.
We are,
so
yes.
Part of being participants in markets is being like well-versed in this stuff.
Yeah,
right?
understanding why they're affecting the market.
Yeah, and in Bitcoin's case, it matters a lot, right? We'll talk about that because Bitcoin, was invented and created during a time of economic strife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2008,
2008. That was like the most recent, like major economic, besides COVID, like ruffling that I can recall in my lifetime, where people started to lose confidence in what we do traditionally in our financial realm, and then some anon dev comes in, creates Bitcoin, and here we are 15 years later.
And it's supposed to be a completely depegged asset across the land.
Right. So, that is the narrative, right? Similar to kind of like gold. Whenever things kind of like become uncertain, like people flee to gold as a store of value, as like a safe haven. So.
Hence, gold has been going up.
Yeah, and Bitcoin hasn't like actually ever faced this type of like economic stage for it to prove that, in my mind.
It's true. I mean, when COVID happened, Bitcoin was $5,000, and it was under a billion. Yeah, it was several $billion. So it was like still a nothing burger at the time, and that was only 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would agree that Bitcoin hasn't really been tested to this degree.
Yeah, but this is important. This is very critical times for Bitcoin to kind of like, prove itself.
Yeah.
Right? And therefore increase its value proposition.
All right, so let's see what Donald Trump says. So oil prices are down, interest rates are down. The slow-moving Fed should cut rates. Food prices are down. There's no inflation, and the long-time abused USA is bringing in billions of dollars a week from the abusing countries on tariffs that are already in place. This is despite the fact that the biggest abuser of them all, China, whose markets are crashing, just raised tariffs by 34%. On top of its long-term ridiculously high tariffs, not acknowledging my warning for abusing countries not to retaliate. They've made enough for decades taking advantage of the good old USA. Our past leaders are to blame for allowing this and so much else to happen to our country and make America great again.
Sounds like a very Trumpy tweet.
Yeah,
for sure.
very much
But,
so.
Yeah, man. I see stuff like this and I get a little concerned. It's definitely, I don't like to see the posturing back and forth between the United States and China, but it is what it is, right? I think a lot of people have been painfully aware that at some point there's going to be like a boxing match among the two global superpowers, right? And
yeah, in the form of missiles.
well, yeah, but before the missiles launch, usually it's like an economic battle,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Before you get to that point. So, I mean, if you lean on the cynical side of like, how you interpret events, someone like me, I get worried when I see, Trump posturing and then China kicking back, because the next tweet here is, they're going to kick back. The next tweet?
Oh, the next one.
Yeah.
The next one.
Oh, never mind. That was a tweet. Yeah, 50%.
50% tariffs of China. So it says President Trump threatens additional 50% tariffs on China if it does not withdraw its 34% tariff increase.
Yeah. So this is what I mean. Like this is.
Yeah. So this is the posturing you're talking about. So China 30% increase is like, okay, if you do that, we'll do 50% increase.
Yeah. And this is where things kind of like go beyond just like a snoozer headline, right? Talks about tariffs, like very uninteresting to people. And when you have, the two global superpowers going tit for tat,
yeah,
on an economic war, it's not rosy, right?
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about why it's not rosy. The Tariff Act of 1930, also known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, was a protectionist trade measure signed into the law of the United States by Herbert Hoover in 1930, named after its chief congressional sponsors. It says the act raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods in an effort to shield American industries from foreign competition during the onset of the Great Depression, which started in October 29. Hoover signed the bill against the advice of many senior economists, yielding to pressure from his party and business leaders, intended to bolster domestic employment and manufacturing. The tariffs increased, deepened the Depression because the U.S. trading partners retaliated with tariffs of their own. Yeah, so we go into this depression in 1929 through tariffs, and then we get this reciprocal tariffs, and we go even deeper into depression.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So whenever signs of like economic instability, I guess, arise, countries start to, I guess, bring things back home and try and support things locally, as opposed to embracing this more liberal idea of what like a globalistic approach to trade, free trade, blah, blah, blah. Does well in times of like economic, fortitude, but whenever things are destabilize, typically, in history's past, we see this kind of isolationist approach, right? Which isn't good, because now all of a sudden, countries that were aligned and had incentives to kind of like collaborate and like not act as allies as opposed to enemies, you kind of like rug that incentive a bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they become more isolated. And then over time, that kind of festers and bleeds into potential, highly competitive situations. Right.
Yeah.
Which,
power projection,
whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Which I don't like,
Yeah. All right. So the CEOs think in the U.S. is probably a recession right now, says BlackRock's Larry Fink.
Yeah.
Yeah, so multi-trillion-dollar asset manager thinks we are already in a recession.
Hard to tell, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a very specific definition of a recession. It's like 2 quarters or 3 quarters back to back.
Declining GDP.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we're necessarily there yet, but he's making a prediction like 2 or 3 quarters from now we'll look back in time and say
It's we were
we were already in a declining state, so we've been in a recession this whole time.
So as this was happening, Federal Reserve announces a closed board meeting for today, so potentially lowering the interest rates. Cheaper money and therefore on-risk assets go up.
Yeah, some people saying like that's not going to work this time around.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know why, but maybe because inflation was already too high at this point. I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
But I think the market is kind of expecting that, right? The Fed to essentially bail us out of another conundrum. Because this is what the United States does, right? We kick the cans down the road.
Yeah.
Just to kind of extend things and to bring reinvigorated confidence into the markets and such, so we could just, keep on going, dude.
Yeah, keep buying assets.
Yeah.
All right. Then we're looking at an article here by Ray Dalio. It's like, if you don't know who Ray Dalio is, definitely look him up. Yeah. He's been the predictor of many things and pretty solid investor as a result.
Yeah, he's quite the slinger of doomer porn, if you're into that kind of thing. Yeah. If you want the most what's the word? Doomer, I guess. Yeah, doomer perspective of where things are headed.
Yeah. See, he thinks that our time is due, right? Every 100 years is a shifting of superpowers.
Right.
And we're at the mark, right? And so he's predicting that this is what it looks like to transition to a new superpower.
Yeah, he has several books kind of delves deep into that. He draws parallels between the Roman Empire's collapse and what we're seeing today. So he breaks things down into very, identifiable catalysts here.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, basically sum it all up, tariffs is a symptom of a much greater fundamental break apart, I guess, societal level.
Yeah, and the article here is titled "Don't Make the Mistake of Thinking that What's Now Happening is Mostly About Tariffs." And so at this moment, a huge amount of attention is being justifiably paid to the announced tariffs and their big impacts on markets and economies, while very little attention is being paid to the circumstances that caused them and the biggest disruptions that are likely still ahead. So there's 5 big things here. The monetary economic order is breaking down. So this is the 100-year cycle that I was referring to earlier. The domestic political order is breaking down. The international geopolitical world order is breaking down. Acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics are increasingly disruptive, and amazing changes in technology such as AI will likely be impactful to all aspects of life. So all these conditions that have been happening are largely the real thing that is causing all this disruption, and the tariffs is probably the straw that broke the camel's back in a sense.
Yeah, it's just the United States reacting, I guess, to the reality setting in, right? The last 100 years, post World War II, where the big victor of that global conflict essentially got to set the ground rules moving forward, right? And cemented, the U.S. positioning authority over the global economic landscape, and have been the main benefactors of that as a result.
Yeah.
Right. But that runs dry because of many different conditional factors, like you're saying. And the result of that is now power is dispersed, right? And it's, to try and maintain that could be a fool's errand, right? It's just.
Yeah. So then the question is, well, what's the strategy? And
yeah, so what do you do?
Yeah, so you could take Warren Buffett's strategies, when the markets are bloody, you invest, right? And you become greedy when people are fearful.
Yeah, so at this point in time, if you're to be buying in now, investing in now, you're betting on some sort of Federal Reserve response or something, or an end to this posturing, some sort of really positive catalyst. Maybe Trump delivers on what he's marketing or branding as the biggest tax cuts in American history. Now all of a sudden, people are liberated from taxes in this country and now become bigger speculators in the market. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know what the consequences of that could be.
Yeah. If you're paying 20-30% taxes, you got 20-30% more to invest in assets, right?
Yeah. Some people will take that opportunity for sure. Right. And
Yeah.
others will, be
Go
able
on
to
vacation.
that or be able to offset the potential inevitable burdens of these tariffs, right? Where all of a sudden
It's
costs
true.
of
Yeah, good
goods
point.
go up, right?
Yeah, good point.
My iPhone might
Yeah.
be
It goes up
20-30% more expensive,
Yeah.
but I can afford it only because of these tax cuts. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. There's a lot of, contingencies on, placing your bets now, right?
Yeah. So, is this good for crypto? It says last time when U.S. imposed tariffs on China in May 2019, NASDAQ dropped 12%. And at the same period, the same time, Bitcoin jumped 70%. So will Bitcoin separate from the U.S. market in April, May like gold did and give us a new all-time pump to 150? So there's a summary on that potential, but that is largely the point of Bitcoin, to be that depegged asset that every country, no matter whether or not they're in conflict with each other, they all still agree that Bitcoin is still valuable and it's become independent.
Yeah, so there's the good news is there is a historical precedent. Like Trump kind of like started this trade war with China during his first administration, and Bitcoin had a historical positive reaction to that. There was like some evidence of capital fleeing in the direction of Bitcoin as his safe haven asset, right?
Yeah.
Now the question is, will it do it again? Because this time these same tensions have only like exacerbated the second term around.
Yeah.
Could be even a more bullish catalyst towards that direction. At least that's what we're all hoping for, right?
Yeah.
That's what Bitcoin is supposed to be about. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I would bet that it does. That's my bet. I could be wrong, though.
Okay. So you're telling people literally to buy Bitcoin.
I am telling people to buy Bitcoin, yes.
All right. All right. We're on, dude.
Yeah, that's the only safest bet here. But in other news, dude, you know, with all these things happening that are bringing the sentiment down, red lights everywhere, we're still human. We still like to make progress.
Right.
And so
the sky isn't falling.
No, it's not falling, dude.
Okay.
It never was. Even though your portfolio is falling, the sky isn't.
I mean, sometimes skies actually fall, though. Sometimes people, like, missiles actually hit your house.
They do. Yeah, that's true.
Or, earthquakes hit and your high rise collapses,
Yeah, that's true.
But
not today.
This isn't
not
that
today.
Case. Yeah, not yet.
Right. In other news, the dire wolf returns for more than 10,000 years of being extinct. This is the company looking to de-extinct the woolly mammoth has brought back the dire wolf, which has been extinct for over 13,000 years. Colossal Biosciences, the genetic engineering company working to bring back the woolly mammoth, has actually already brought back two of its extinct Ice Age co-inhabitants, the dire wolf. So here we are.
Oh, it's so cute, dude. But that thing's going to eventually grow into a behemoth of a dog.
Yeah.
That would intimidate any man on Earth.
I thought I saw a meme in here where it was like, they reference Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you watch Game of Thrones,
yeah,
then you kind of understand the scale, right? These were some haunchers, dude, some real beefcakes of pups. They look like little cute dogs. So I don't know. Going into the logistics of how they are pulling this off is definitely interesting. It's just felt like including it because end this on a positive note, right? That despite like all this fear and doom porn that, crypto Twitter is consumed by right now.
Yes.
People like drumming up like the worst case scenarios. Underneath it all is always that like underlying persistency, right? Which is like human beings always finding or uncracking this like next frontier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And not only is there one, there's two of them. It's Romulus and Remus.
Yeah.
And here they are.
Yeah, there's a whole YouTube link there where you can watch them grow, lads. So we'll be tuning in for the next however many years just to see these things turn into absolute beasts.
Yeah, I'm glad we sort of ended on a positive note because we spent, it felt like almost a year on doomer porn on this channel.
Nah, man, what do you mean?
Yeah. No, not this year. No, I'm talking about years past.
Well, yeah, there's been
like 2020 when FTX hit. We, as a matter of fact, TJ was like, let's do a board and like, let's write Doomer. And it's like, let's not do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
No more Doom.
No more Doom.
Yeah.
Well, it's because, there was so much Doom in the market that time,
during
that time frame where it was having like real psychological effects, right? We're like, we got to stop this, dude, even though like it appeared to be like the only conversation point at the time.
And you know what happened as soon as you said that?
We found ordinals?
That's right.
Yeah, that's what desperation does, dude. It gets you like looking through like the trenchiest of trenches to find some glimmer of like optimism, right?
Right.
Which it worked.
It did.
The Bitcoin ecosystem ordinals, very optimistic outlook. And now, not anymore.
Yeah.
Now that whole space is part of like this doomer perspective of things. But so we need to look for the next layer of
It's gonna be
optimism.
Where do we buy the direwolf token, dude?
Yeah, man. How is the future? Maybe it's Colossus, dude. Like they're gonna create Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
For real.
I definitely would go to the zoo if it was Jurassic Park.
Yeah. But so nonetheless, grand takeaway here is don't panic, everybody.
Yeah.
I know we keep saying that every time like something bad happens in the markets and then somehow things get worse, you know, but still, you know, you have to have conviction in Bitcoin. First of all, right, to have conviction in the rest of crypto. And again, this is the perfect like macroeconomic situation for Bitcoin to really stand out and prove itself as like a true like depegged asset from like what these human beings have kind of like manifested, right, in the traditional sense.
Yeah, trust in Bitcoin is really that simple.
Yeah, so we're here for it. We're going to keep covering the,
the collapse of human society.
And the Bitcoin's, surgeoning.
Yeah, surgeoning, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see. So I'm not expecting this to be like anything, much more dramatic than what we've already experienced, to be honest. But
I know, we almost had like the zombie apocalypse break out, and we made through it.
Yeah, we'll see. But nonetheless, these are major like historical time points, right, from like a economic perspective. So
yeah, so if we missed anything in the conversation today that you're seeing that we sort of missed, definitely put in the comments section below. We do respond to all the comments that we can. And make sure you follow our Twitter. And yeah, if you find anything you want us to talk about in the crypto space, let us know in the comment section below as well. Appreciate you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.
Peace.